Leave this section now. We can't have someone like you in first class today of all days. The CEO's audit team is coming, and frankly, you're ruining the image we need to present," the pilot said firmly to Vanessa, the black woman. She walked into the peep section wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt while left. The flight attendants and pilot's eyes swept over her modest attire with unconcealed contempt. "I'm sorry, but I think you're in the wrong place," the pilot sneered, gesturing toward the economy section. "This seat is only for our elite passengers, and you don't fit into this section." As the flight attendants snickered and other passengers stared, Vanessa's face flushed with humiliation as she was set to reveal who she really was. They didn't know, the passenger they had been trying to remove from the VIP seat, the woman they had humiliated, insulted, and threatened, was not only their boss but also the powerful person they'd been expecting. Have you ever been judged wrongly solely on your appearance? Share your experience. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And make sure you hit subscribe right now because the justice served in this video is something you won't ever want to miss. Vanessa Mitchell wasn't born into privilege or power. At 38 years old, she had spent more than half her life working her way up through the ranks of what would eventually become Skyline Airways Group. Her journey began 16 years earlier, when she first put on a flight attendant uniform, determined to turn her love of aviation into a career. Growing up as the daughter of a mechanic and a public school teacher in a modest neighborhood, her father spent 30 years fixing commercial aircraft at the local airport, coming home with stories that fascinated young Vanessa. Her mother taught 6th grade math, instilling in her daughter both a love of learning and the confidence to pursue her dreams in a world that often tried to limit them. When Vanessa first announced her intention to work in the airline industry, her parents were supportive but realistic. "You'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far," her father warned her. Knowing the challenges his daughter would face in an industry that had long been resistant to change, her mother simply squeezed her hand and said, "Then she'll work 3 times as hard." And work she did. While serving drinks and demonstrating safety procedures, Vanessa was also earning her business degree at night. While other flight attendants saw their position as temporary, Vanessa was studying the operational structure of the airline, asking questions about logistics, customer experience, and brand development. By her 5th year, she had moved into scheduling. By her 10th, she was managing crew operations. Her meteoric rise through the company came not through connections or privilege, but through a unique perspective that could only be gained by experiencing every level of service. When the board selected her as CEO, it wasn't a publicity move. It was recognition that Vanessa Mitchell understood the airline business from the ground up in a way that no other executive could. As CEO, Vanessa implemented what many industry insiders considered a radical approach to quality control. She would travel incognito on different routes, deliberately dressing down and removing all indicators of her position. She would check in like a regular passenger, sit where her ticket assigned her, and observe how employees treated everyday customers. "The true measure of a company isn't how they treat VIPs," she told her executive team. "It's how they treat the person they think doesn't matter." That's why, on this particular Tuesday morning, she was preparing for another undercover evaluation. For today's flight from Atlanta to Chicago, Vanessa had chosen a deliberately casual outfit. Comfortable jeans that showed signs of wear, a simple navy blue blouse without designer labels, and minimal jewelry, just a watch and small earrings. Her natural hair was pulled back in a practical style, and she carried a worn leather backpack rather than her usual executive briefcase. Looking in the mirror before leaving her hotel, she nodded with satisfaction. There was nothing about her appearance that would identify her as the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. perfect for evaluating how staff treated ordinary passengers. What Vanessa didn't know was that this particular evaluation would reveal far more than she had bargained for. Earlier that morning, at Skyline's Atlanta hub, Operations Manager Thomas Griffin had called an emergency briefing with all staff assigned to Flight 2187. "I have an important announcement," he told the assembled crew, his voice tense. "Corporate audit team will be on flight number 2187 today. Everyone needs to look sharp." The room immediately filled with nervous whispers and anxious glances. These surprise audits were known to make or break careers. "Do we know who's coming?" asked senior flight attendant Brenda Morris, a 25-year veteran known for her rigid adherence to rules and procedures. "No names," Griffin replied. "Just that they'll be evaluating every aspect of the premium service experience. They report directly to CEO Mitchell." In the corner of the room, Captain Richard Wells straightened his already impeccable uniform. At 58, with nearly 3 decades at the airline, Wells had developed a reputation for running a tight ship, sometimes at the expense of customer comfort. His technical skills were impeccable, but his passenger survey scores had been declining for years. As the briefing concluded and crew members dispersed to their assignments, Wells pulled Morris aside. "We need first-class looking pristine today," he said in a low voice. "No riffraff." Brenda nodded in agreement. "I'll make sure of it. Premium service for premium passengers only. If the CEO's team sees anything out of place, we're all in trouble," Wells continued. "We know what our real first-class passengers expect." "Absolutely," Brenda agreed. "I'll handle the cabin. You focus on the flight." Neither of them noticed Maya Rodriguez, a junior flight attendant recently transferred from the Dallas hub, listening from nearby with a troubled expression. As this conversation was taking place, Vanessa Mitchell was arriving at the airport, observing the unusually high level of activity around Gate A7. Staff members were frantically polishing surfaces, adjusting uniforms, and reviewing procedures. The energy was palpable and revealing. Pausing outside the gate area, Vanessa made a quick call to her assistant. "Everything set for the Chicago meeting?" she asked, maintaining her cover with a casual tone. "All arranged," her assistant replied. "The executive team will meet you at O'Hare. They have no idea you're coming yourself?" Vanessa smiled. "That's exactly the point. I need to see how they treat passengers when they think no one important is watching." As Vanessa approached Gate A7, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The gate area, usually a scene of controlled chaos, had been transformed into what could only be described as a stage being set for an important performance. Christina Sanders, a gate agent, was frantically organizing the boarding area. She adjusted the premium boarding sign 3 times, wiped down the counter repeatedly, and shuffled through passenger manifests with nervous energy. Her supervisor, David Pearson, stood nearby, observing the preparations with a critical eye. "Everyone needs to be perfect today," Pearson reminded the staff, his voice low but intense. "First-class customers get extra attention. Make sure you're checking for elite status indicators and addressing platinum members by name." Christina nodded vigorously, her eyes scanning the growing crowd of passengers. "Do we know what the audit team looks like?" she whispered to Pearson. "No details," he replied. "Just be on your guard. They could be anyone." The irony of this statement was not lost on Vanessa, as she observed this exchange from a nearby seating area. She had deliberately arrived early to watch the pre-boarding process, a critical part of the customer experience that executives rarely witnessed firsthand. When priority boarding was announced, Vanessa joined the line behind several business travelers in expensive suits. Christina's customer service demeanor was impeccable as she processed the first few passengers, offering warm smiles and personalized greetings to each one. "Good morning, Mr. Donovan. Chicago again this week? Your usual seat is all ready for you." "Welcome back, Miss Winters. We've noted your beverage preference for pre-departure service. But when Vanessa stepped forward and presented her boarding pass and ID, Christina's demeanor transformed. The gate agent barely looked up, her eyes fixed on Vanessa's casual clothing and worn backpack, rather than her face or documentation. There was no greeting, no smile, not even the basic courtesy she had shown to previous passengers. Christina processed the boarding pass with mechanical efficiency, her eyes narrowing slightly when she noticed the first-class seat assignment. Without a word, she slid the documents back across the counter and immediately turned to speak to her colleague. Why would they book someone like her in first class today of all days? Christina whispered, not quite quietly enough. When they know we're expecting the CEO's team? Her colleague shrugged. Maybe it was the only seat left? On a Tuesday morning flight? Doubtful, Christina replied with a dismissive snort. Someone in reservations is going to hear about this. Vanessa made a mental note of both the conversation and the striking difference in service quality, based solely on appearance. This was precisely why she conducted these undercover evaluations. The disparity would never be visible during an announced inspection. Once past the gate, Vanessa paused briefly in the jet bridge, allowing some distance between herself and other first-class passengers. This vantage point would give her a clear view of how the cabin crew greeted different customers, another critical touchpoint in the passenger experience. Inside the aircraft, senior flight attendant Brenda Morris was making final adjustments to the first-class cabin. A veteran with 25 years of service, Brenda had built a reputation for meticulous attention to detail. Today, that attention had transformed into something closer to obsession. Everything must be immaculate for the audit team, she instructed Maya Rodriguez, a junior flight attendant who had transferred from Dallas just 3 months ago. Align the pillows precisely. Make sure the amenity kits are positioned at exactly the same angle in each seat pocket. Maya worked quickly and efficiently, her movements betraying none of the anxiety evident in her senior colleague. The cabin looks perfect, Miss Morris, she assured Brenda. Perfect isn't good enough today, Brenda replied tensely. It needs to be exceptional. This audit could determine the future of this route and our positions. As the first passengers began to board, Brenda stationed herself at the entrance. Passenger manifest in hand, she greeted each first-class traveler with practiced warmth, checking names against her list as though searching for someone specific. Welcome aboard, Mr. Gerald. Your Manhattan is ready whenever you'd like it. Lovely to see you again, Dr. Nathy. The captain wanted me to personally welcome you back. These personalized greetings continued for each passenger, until Vanessa appeared in the doorway. The transformation in Brenda's demeanor was immediate and striking. The warm smile vanished, replaced by a look of barely concealed dismay. Her eyes darted from Vanessa's face to her casual clothing, then to the boarding pass in her hand. There must be a mistake with your seat assignment, Brenda said, not even attempting to mask her disapproval. Let me see your boarding pass. Vanessa handed over her documentation without comment, observing Brenda's reaction carefully. The flight attendant scrutinized the boarding pass as though searching for evidence of forgery, her forehead creasing with increasing concern. This says 2A, that's in first class, Brenda stated unnecessarily, her tone suggesting this was somehow problematic. Yes, I'm aware, Vanessa replied calmly. Brenda looked past Vanessa to the jet bridge, then nervously checked her watch. The audit team will be boarding any minute now, she murmured, more to herself than to Vanessa. With obvious reluctance, she handed back the boarding pass. Very well, your seat is the second row on the right. As Vanessa moved toward her assigned seat, she overheard Brenda whispering urgently to Maya. We can't have her in first class when the executives arrive. It ruins the whole premium image we're trying to project. Maya's response was too quiet to hear, but her uncomfortable expression spoke volumes. Unlike her senior colleague, the young flight attendant seemed troubled by Brenda's attitude. Vanessa settled into seat 2A, a spacious first-class accommodation by the window. Unlike the passengers around her, she wasn't immediately offered a pre-departure beverage or a warm towel. Instead, she observed as Brenda continued to fuss over other first-class passengers while deliberately avoiding her section. After about 10 minutes, when all other first-class customers had been served, Maya approached with a glass of water. "I thought you might like something to drink," she said quietly, offering a small, apologetic smile. "Thank you," Vanessa replied. "That's very thoughtful." The contrast between the two flight attendants' behavior was striking. As the final economy passengers boarded, Brenda returned to the first-class cabin with a passenger manifest in hand. Her expression had shifted from mild annoyance to grim determination as she approached Vanessa's seat. "Ma'am, there's a situation with your seating," she announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Vanessa looked up from her phone where she'd been documenting her observations. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked, knowing full well there wasn't. "No, but today we're expecting a corporate audit team," Brenda explained, her voice tense. "We need to present a certain image. I'm sure you understand." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable in its meaning. Vanessa decided to force Brenda to be explicit. "And what image is that exactly?" she asked directly, maintaining steady eye contact. Brenda's composure faltered momentarily. She hadn't expected to be challenged. "Professional, executive, you know, our typical first-class demographic." She gestured vaguely at Vanessa's clothing and then at the business travelers in suits surrounding them. "I see," Vanessa replied calmly. "Well, I paid for this seat and I'll be staying in it. My appearance has no bearing on my right to be here." Brenda's professional veneer cracked further, revealing genuine panic beneath. "You don't understand," she insisted, lowering her voice slightly. "The CEO's team will be inspecting our service standards. This reflects on all of us." "I'm quite familiar with service standards," Vanessa replied. "And I believe they should apply equally to all paying customers, regardless of their appearance." This response clearly wasn't what Brenda had expected or wanted. She retreated momentarily, conferring with other crew members near the galley. Vanessa could see her gesturing animatedly while looking in her direction, clearly trying to formulate a new strategy for removing the unsuitable passenger from first class. Meanwhile, the boarding process continued until finally, the boarding door was closed and the standard announcements began. This seemed to trigger new anxiety in Brenda, who began checking her watch repeatedly and scanning the cabin with increasing agitation. "They should be here by now," she muttered, pacing between the galley and the front row. When the final boarding complete announcement came over the PA system, Brenda's expression shifted from concern to confusion. Vanessa observed as Brenda cornered Maya near the forward lavatory. "Where's the audit team?" she demanded in a harsh whisper that carried despite her attempt at discretion. "They're supposed to be on this flight." Maya, to her credit, maintained her composure despite her senior's increasingly erratic behavior. "Maybe they're traveling incognito?" she suggested reasonably. The memo didn't specify how they'd identify themselves. This comment struck Brenda like a physical blow. Her eyes widened with sudden panic as she scanned the first-class cabin again, this time with newfound paranoia. Could one of these passengers be from corporate? Was the audit already underway without her knowledge? Her gaze eventually returned to Vanessa, the only passenger who didn't fit her mental image of a proper first-class customer. Without another word, she turned and rushed toward the cockpit, presumably to alert Captain Wells to the situation. As the cockpit door opened and closed, Vanessa continued making notes on her phone. The level of discrimination she had witnessed today went far beyond the occasional service lapses she had observed on previous evaluation flights. This was systematic, deliberate differential treatment based solely on appearance and perceived status. The implications were troubling. If this was happening on a flight where staff were specifically on high alert for an audit, what was the experience like for passengers on ordinary days when no one was watching? How many customers had been made to feel unwelcome or inferior simply because they didn't match someone's narrow definition of what a first-class passenger should look like? If you were in Vanessa's shoes, what would you have done? Would you leave the seat you paid for them, or would you stand your ground and remain in your seat? Don't forget to click the subscribe button to enjoy more of these stories. The cockpit door swung open with force as Captain Richard Wells emerged into the first-class cabin. At 58, Wells carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute authority. His immaculate uniform, adorned with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder. What's the holdup? He demanded, scanning the cabin with irritation. The audit team could arrive any minute. Brenda Morris quickly pulled him aside, speaking in hushed but urgent tones while gesturing discreetly toward Vanessa. Though their conversation wasn't meant to be overheard, the tension of the moment carried their words to nearby passengers. "She refuses to move," Brenda explained. "I've tried explaining about the audit, but she won't budge." Captain Wells straightened his jacket and approached Vanessa's seat with the practiced stride of someone used to resolving problems quickly. His expression made it clear that this was not a conversation, but an order about to be delivered. "Ma'am, I understand you're causing a disruption," he began, his tone suggesting that the matter was already decided. Vanessa looked up from her phone, her expression calm but resolute. "I'm simply sitting in my assigned seat." The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He clearly wasn't accustomed to having his authority questioned, particularly by someone he deemed unworthy of first class. "Look," he said, lowering his voice slightly but maintaining an edge that bordered on contempt, "we both know you don't belong up here. Not today. Not when we're being evaluated." The implication was unmistakable. It wasn't about the seat itself. It was about who they believed should occupy it. And in their eyes, Vanessa didn't fit the profile. "My ticket entitles me to this seat," Vanessa replied evenly. "And I intend to remain in it for the duration of the flight." Something in Wells's expression hardened. Without asking permission, he reached for Vanessa's carry-on bag stowed beside her seat. "Let me help you relocate to where you'll be more comfortable," he said, the thinly veiled condescension dripping from every word. Vanessa immediately moved her hand to block him, pulling her bag away from his reach. "Don't touch my belongings." The captain straightened, his face flushing with barely contained anger at being defied in front of other passengers. "This attitude is exactly the problem," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Your kind always has to make a scene." The mask of professionalism had slipped, revealing the prejudice beneath. A heavy silence fell over the first-class cabin as other passengers either stared openly or pretended to be absorbed in their devices. But all were listening. Wells glanced around and then leaned closer to Vanessa, lowering his voice, though not enough to prevent his words from being heard by those nearby. "Let me be clear," he said with deliberate precision. "This section is for our professional clientele, not for housekeepers playing dress-up." The naked prejudice in his statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One older white woman actually gasped audibly. In the galley, Maya froze, a look of horror crossing her face at her captain's words. Vanessa, however, maintained her composure, though her eyes hardened. "Excuse me. What exactly are you implying?" It was a challenge, an invitation for Wells to either backtrack or make his bigotry explicit. He chose the latter. Don't play innocent, he scoffed. You know exactly what I mean. Emboldened by the captain's open hostility, Brenda stepped forward to join the confrontation. You're embarrassing yourself, she said to Vanessa. Why not just go back where you belong? The coordinated attack continued as Wells looked Vanessa up and down with exaggerated skepticism. What's next? He mocked. You'll claim you're some kind of executive yourself? From across the aisle, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit chimed in, apparently feeling the need to align himself with the perceived authority figures. Some people just want attention, he remarked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Wells nodded in agreement, turning back to Vanessa with renewed confidence. If you had any class, he continued, you'd understand why you don't fit in here. Brenda snickered beside him. You can find your own people in economy. Throughout this barrage, Vanessa remained seated, her back straight, her expression revealing nothing of the detailed mental notes she was taking of each comment, each name, each violation of not just company policy but basic human dignity. This wasn't just poor customer service. It wasn't even simple discrimination. This was a systemic failure of the very culture she had been working to transform within Skyline Airways. And it was happening in front of multiple witnesses. The confrontation had reached a critical point. Captain Wells, perhaps sensing that his authority alone wasn't enough to intimidate Vanessa into moving, decided to escalate to his final option. Final warning, he stated, all pretense of customer service now abandoned. Move to economy, or I'll have security drag you out. The threat hung in the air, but instead of cowering, Vanessa remained perfectly calm. She looked directly into the captain's eyes and said, I'd like your full name and employee ID, Captain. Wells actually laughed at this, a short, dismissive sound that conveyed his utter disbelief at her audacity. You think you're in a position to make demands? The moment had arrived. Vanessa reached for her phone, maintaining steady eye contact with Wells as she did so. His smug expression faltered slightly as she dialed with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who would answer. This is Mitchell, she said clearly. I need immediate executive intervention on Flight 21A7. Wells, still not comprehending the seismic shift that was occurring, scoffed again. Who do you think you're calling? Your lawyer? He laughed, looking to Brenda and the supportive passenger for validation. Vanessa ended her call and returned the phone to her pocket with deliberate calm. I'm calling my executive team, she replied evenly. The audit you're so worried about? It's already happening. The captain's confident expression began to falter. What are you talking about? Captain Richard Wells, Vanessa began, her voice taking on a new authority that seemed to reshape the air in the cabin. Employee ID 45872. 27 years with Northern Regional Airways before the merger with Skyline. Consistently excellent technical evaluations. Consistently problematic passenger satisfaction scores, particularly from women and people of color. Wells froze, his face transitioning from confusion to dawning horror as the realization began to take hold. How do you? But Vanessa cut him short. Senior Flight Attendant Brenda Morris, Vanessa continued, shifting her gaze. Employee ID 30259. 25 years of service. 14 customer complaints in the past year alone for selective service, a pattern that somehow never appeared in your supervisor's reports. Brenda's face had gone completely white. You can't possibly, she began, but her voice trailed off as the impossible truth became undeniable. Vanessa stood now, her posture transforming from passive passenger to executive authority in an instant. The change was so profound that several nearby passengers instinctively straightened in their seats. I am Vanessa Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer of this airline, she stated, her voice carrying clearly throughout the now silent cabin. And I am the audit team you've been waiting for. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Captain Wells physically staggered back a step. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth. And from the galley, Maya's expression transformed from shock to something approaching vindication. In the span of 30 seconds, the power dynamic in the cabin had completely reversed. The people who had been so confident in their authority moments before now found themselves facing the one person in the company with the power to end their careers with a single word. But the most powerful aspect of this moment wasn't just the revelation of Vanessa's identity. It was the exposed truth of how the airline staff behaved when they thought no one of consequence was watching. The prejudice, the discrimination, the casual cruelty directed at someone based solely on appearance. All of it laid bare not just for Vanessa to see, but for every passenger in that cabin to witness. The smartphone footage being discreetly recorded by several travelers would later become key evidence in what the media would call one of the most significant corporate reckonings with systemic bias in the airline industry. But in this moment, as the realization of what had just happened began to sink in, the most pressing question for Captain Wells and Brenda Morris wasn't about corporate policy or social media backlash. It was much simpler. Would they still have jobs by the time this plane landed? The atmosphere in the first-class cabin transformed in an instant. Vanessa Mitchell rose from her seat, her posture shifting from defensive passenger to commanding executive. 22 years of airline experience radiated through her stance as she addressed the stunned captain directly. "I'm Vanessa Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer," she stated, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to running board meetings and making billion-dollar decisions. Captain Wells, whose confidence had been absolute just moments before, now appeared physically shaken. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to form words. That's impossible," he stammered, his complexion rapidly paling. "The CEO wouldn't be." "It's her, Captain," Maya confirmed from behind him, her tablet displaying Vanessa's executive profile. "That's Miss Mitchell." Brenda's reaction was even more dramatic. The color drained entirely from her face as the full implications of what had just happened began to register. The passenger they had been trying to remove from first class, the woman they had humiliated, insulted, and threatened, was not only their boss, but the most powerful person in the entire company. Around them, the cabin erupted in whispers. Several passengers, who had been discreetly recording the confrontation on their phones, now did so openly. The story was too extraordinary not to document. A black woman, discriminated against by airline staff, revealed to be the CEO of the very airline mistreating her. Captain Wells, a veteran of countless in-flight emergencies, appeared more destabilized by this revelation than he had likely been by any technical malfunction in his 3-decade career. His training kicked in as he attempted damage control. "Had I known who you were," he began, his tone shifting to one of desperate appeasement. Vanessa raised her hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "That's precisely the problem, Captain Wells. You shouldn't treat anyone this way, regardless of who they are." The words landed with devastating precision. It wasn't just a rebuke. It was an indictment of the entire approach Wells and Brenda had displayed. A passenger's appearance, clothing, or race should never determine the quality of service they receive. Vanessa continued, her voice level but intense. "Every person who boards this aircraft deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That's not just my personal expectation, it's written in the company mission statement that you both claim to uphold." By now, the entire first-class cabin was silent. All attention focused on the unfolding confrontation. Even passengers in the first few rows of economy had noticed something significant was happening and were straining to see and hear. Vanessa turned slightly to address not just Wells and Brenda, but all the passengers within earshot. This wasn't just about the audit anymore, it was about transparency and accountability. "What you've witnessed today is exactly why I traveled unannounced," she explained. She gestured around the cabin. This allows me to see how our team members treat people when they think no one important is watching. Because the truth is, every passenger is important, regardless of their title or appearance. Some passengers nodded in agreement. Others looked embarrassed, perhaps recognizing their own complicity in the situation. Particularly the man who had sided with Wells earlier. Wells had recovered enough of his composure to attempt another defense. "Miss Mitchell, this is all a misunderstanding," he began, his voice taking on a placating tone completely different from the authoritative one he had used earlier. Vanessa turned back to him, her gaze unflinching. "Is it a misunderstanding that you called me a housekeeper playing dress-up? That you referred to my kind? Are those phrases open to interpretation, Captain Wells?" The directness of the question left no room for evasion. Wells's mouth opened, but no words came out. Brenda stepped forward, desperation evident in her voice. "We were just trying to maintain standards for the audit." "By being racist?" Vanessa asked sharply. "Those are your standards? Because they are certainly not the standards of Skyline Airways." Brenda flinched as though she had been slapped. "No, that's not what Your words and actions were clear to everyone in this cabin," Vanessa stated firmly. "There's no ambiguity about what happened here today." Wells found his voice again, though it had lost all its previous authority. "That's not fair. We didn't know who you were." It was the wrong defense, and Vanessa seized on it immediately. "Again, that's exactly the point," she said, addressing not just Wells but everyone listening. "You should treat everyone with dignity, not just those you think are important. The measure of our character isn't how we treat people who can help or hurt us. It's how we treat those who we believe can do neither." The philosophical weight of her statement settled over the cabin. This wasn't just about airline service anymore. It was about fundamental human decency. "The fact that you would have treated me differently had you known my position makes your behavior worse, not better," Vanessa continued. "It reveals that you're capable of providing respectful service when you deem someone worthy of it. You simply chose not to do so based on prejudiced assumptions." By now the situation had escalated beyond the confines of the first-class cabin. The flight's departure had been delayed by nearly 20 minutes, and ground operations had been notified of an in-flight situation requiring assistance. As if on cue, the forward cabin door reopened, and 2 uniformed security officers boarded the aircraft, responding to the captain's earlier call to remove the disruptive passenger. What they encountered instead was a scene very different from what they had been told to expect. Vanessa turned to the officers with calm authority. "I'm Vanessa Mitchell, CEO of Skyline Airways. There has been a significant violation of company policy aboard this flight. Please escort Captain Wells and Senior Flight Attendant Morris from the aircraft." The security officers exchanged confused glances, clearly trying to reconcile the situation described to them with the reality they were witnessing. "She's the CEO," confirmed a passenger who had been recording the entire confrontation. They were discriminating against her because of how she was dressed. Another passenger held up his phone, displaying a photo of Vanessa from a recent business magazine cover. Despite the casual clothes and lack of executive styling, the face was unmistakably the same. The security officers' training kicked in. They nodded respectfully to Vanessa and turned their attention to Wells and Brenda. "Please come with us," the senior officer instructed professionally. Wells' expression transformed from shock to panic as the full consequences of his actions began to register. His career, 3 decades built on technical excellence and seniority, was evaporating before his eyes. "Please, Miss Mitchell," he begged, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved. "I have a family." "As do many of the passengers you've disrespected throughout your career," Vanessa replied evenly. "Actions have consequences, Captain Wells." Next to him, Brenda had begun to cry, her professional composure shattered. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "Discrimination is not our protocol, Miss Morris, and you know that. Security, please proceed." As Wells and Brenda were escorted from the aircraft, Vanessa turned to Maya, who had been standing witness to the entire confrontation with a mixture of shock and validation. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm temporarily appointing you as acting senior flight attendant for this flight. Can you handle that responsibility?" Maya straightened her posture, professionalism overcoming her surprise. "Yes, Miss Mitchell. Absolutely." "Good. Please make an announcement explaining the delay and crew change. You can refer to it as due to personnel issues. No further details are necessary at this time." Maya nodded and moved toward the PA system, while Vanessa addressed the remaining crew members who had gathered uncertainly at the edges of the first-class cabin. "What happened today is not what Skyline Airways stands for," she told them firmly, but not unkindly. "This is an opportunity for all of us to remember that our company values aren't just words on a website. They're principles that should guide every interaction with every passenger." The crew members nodded, chastened, not just by the removal of their senior colleagues, but by the CEO's presence and direct involvement. "We'll be departing shortly," Vanessa continued. "I expect exemplary service to all passengers for the remainder of this flight, not because I'm on board, but because that's the standard our customers deserve every day." As the remaining crew dispersed to prepare for departure, Vanessa returned to her seat, the same seat 2A that had been the center of so much controversy just minutes earlier. Several nearby passengers offered supportive nods or quiet words of approval for how she had handled the situation. Maya's voice came over the PA system, professional and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in our departure. We've experienced a required crew change due to personnel issues. Our new flight crew will be taking over shortly, and we expect to be on our way within the next 15 minutes. We appreciate your patience and understanding." What Maya didn't announce, but what everyone in first class already knew, was that this flight would become a turning point for Skyline Airways. The videos already being uploaded to social media would ensure that the incident wouldn't remain private, but Vanessa had no intention of hiding what had happened. True leadership isn't about concealing problems. It's about confronting them directly and using them as catalysts for meaningful change. As the replacement captain boarded the aircraft and introduced himself to the passengers, Vanessa Mitchell was already composing an email to her executive team. The subject line was simple but profound: "What we learned today." The message would eventually become the foundation for a complete overhaul of Skyline's training protocols, evaluation procedures, and corporate culture initiatives. But that was for tomorrow. For today, the most powerful woman in commercial aviation sat quietly in seat 2A, watching as her company either lived up to its values or fell short, just as she had done for 22 years, from flight attendant to CEO. 1 week after the incident that would become known internally as Flight 2187, Vanessa Mitchell sat in her corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The floor-to-ceiling windows typically offered a view that inspired big-picture thinking, but today her attention was focused on the documents spread across her desk. Across from her sat Elaine Dawson, Skyline Airways HR Director. "The termination paperwork is complete for both Captain Wells and Senior Flight Attendant Morris," Elaine explained, sliding 2 folders across the polished surface of Vanessa's desk. "The board has unanimously approved your decision." Vanessa nodded, opening each folder to review the contents. The documentation was thorough. Statements from witnesses, transcripts from the audio recordings several passengers had provided, and detailed accounts of previous complaints that had somehow never made it to executive review. The evidence painted a clear picture of a pattern, not an isolated incident. This wasn't about one bad day or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was about ingrained behaviors that had gone unchecked for years. "There's one more thing," Elaine added, her tone shifting slightly. "They've both requested a meeting to apologize personally. Wells called 3 times yesterday alone." Vanessa looked up from the paperwork, her expression thoughtful rather than vindictive. "Schedule it," she decided after a moment. "Everyone deserves a chance to be heard." Elaine appeared surprised by this response. "You're willing to meet with them? After what they did?" "This isn't about my feelings, Elaine," Vanessa replied. "It's about creating the culture we claim to value. If they want to speak, I should listen. That's part of the learning process, for all of us." As Elaine made notes, Vanessa turned her attention to a more positive development. How is Maya Rodriguez settling into her new role? The HR director's expression brightened considerably. "Exceptionally well. The promotion to permanent senior flight attendant was announced yesterday, and the crew response has been overwhelmingly positive. She's already implementing that new training program she proposed. Service without assumptions, she's calling it." 3 months later, a different kind of meeting took place in Skyline's corporate headquarters. The conference room was deliberately small, designed for candid conversation rather than corporate presentations. At one end of the table sat Vanessa Mitchell. At the other end sat Richard Wells and Brenda Morris. The 3 months had visibly changed the former captain and flight attendant. Gone was the arrogant authority that had characterized Wells during the confrontation. Absent was the entitled superiority Brenda had displayed. Both appeared genuinely humbled by their experiences since that fateful flight. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," Wells began, his voice lacking the commanding tone he had once wielded like a weapon. "I know you have no obligation to do so." Vanessa nodded but remained silent, giving them space to continue. "These past months have been..." Wells paused, searching for words. "Transformative. Painful, yes, but necessary. I've spent my life judging people by appearances. I never realized how deeply it affected my behavior, how it shaped every interaction." "The bias training was just the beginning," Brenda added, her eyes downcast. "Working in customer service jobs since my termination showed me how it feels to be on the receiving end of prejudice. Being dismissed, being treated as less than. It changes you. Makes you question your worth in ways I never understood before." She looked up, meeting Vanessa's gaze directly. "I've spent 25 years in first-class cabins, treating people differently based on how they looked, how they dressed, the color of their skin. I told myself it was about standards, but it was really about prejudice, my prejudice." Vanessa listened attentively to their reflections. When they finished, the silence lingered for a moment before she spoke. "The easy path would be to never let you fly for us again," she said finally. "That would certainly send a message about zero tolerance for discrimination. But real change comes from growth, not punishment." She opened a folder that had been sitting closed on the table throughout their conversation. "That's why I've been reviewing your progress reports from the rehabilitation program. The feedback from your counselors, your community service supervisors, and your bias training facilitators tells a consistent story of genuine remorse and committed learning." Wells and Brenda exchanged a surprised glance, clearly not expecting this development. "Are you saying..." Wells began cautiously. "I'm offering you both a path back to Skyline Airways," Vanessa confirmed. "Under strict 12-month probation with specific conditions." She turned to Wells first. "Richard, you would not only return as a captain, you would also join our diversity training team, sharing your experience and perspective with other pilots. Your technical expertise is valuable, but your newfound awareness of bias might be even more so." Then to Brenda, "Miss Morris, you would return to in-flight service, but in economy class, under Maya Rodriguez's direct supervision." The symmetry seems appropriate, learning from the very colleague whose concerns you once dismissed. The shock on their faces was evident, but so was something else, relief tinged with gratitude. "Why would you do this?" Brenda asked softly. "After what we did." Vanessa's response was measured and deliberate. "Because termination without possibility of redemption doesn't solve the deeper problem. It might satisfy a desire for justice, but it doesn't create lasting change. And lasting change is what Skyline Airways, what our entire society, needs most." This philosophy would become the cornerstone of Skyline's approach to addressing bias and discrimination. Rather than simply removing problematic employees, the company began investing in rehabilitation and reintegration, turning mistakes into teaching moments and offenders into advocates. 6 months after Flight 2187, Vanessa Mitchell stood on stage at the International Aviation Conference, addressing industry leaders from around the world. Behind her, a screen displayed the Skyline Airways logo alongside the words "Second Chance Initiative." The impact of Skyline's approach extended far beyond one company or even one industry. Within 2 years, the Second Chance Initiative had been adopted by organizations across the service sector, from hotels to retail chains. Companies that implemented similar programs reported not only improved customer satisfaction scores, but also increased employee retention and stronger team cohesion. The statistics were compelling. Organizations that embraced rehabilitation-focused responses to bias incidents saw 43% fewer repeat offenses compared to those with zero-tolerance policies alone. Employee surveys showed 67% greater trust in leadership when redemption pathways existed alongside clear consequences. But perhaps the most powerful testament to the initiative's success could be found in the testimonials of those who had experienced discrimination firsthand. Passengers and employees who reported feeling genuinely valued by companies that didn't just punish bias, but actively worked to transform it. As for Flight 2187, the incident that sparked this movement, it became a case study taught in business schools around the world. Not as an example of corporate scandal, but as a model for how leadership, accountability, and compassion could converge to create meaningful change. Vanessa Mitchell had transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for industry-wide reflection. By choosing education over exile, rehabilitation over rejection, she demonstrated that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't punishment alone. It's the creation of pathways that allow people to become better than they were yesterday. If you love this story, hit the subscribe button and share with others. Our next story is one you mustn't miss.